May the words of my mouth and the meditation of my heart be acceptable in your sight, O God, my strength and my Redeemer. I'm no farmer. My dad grew up on a farm near Opie because his dad was a farmer. That was before my father graduated from high school, and my grandfather sold the farm and moved the rest of the family to Iowa to sell cattle feed to farmers. There are some great-grandparents on both sides of the family, too, who are farmers, mostly in eastern Kansas. So although I can barely keep a houseplant alive, I am descended from at least a few farmers. And I can pretty much understand today's parable, a story about a man sowing seed, which is what farmers do, right? Some of Jesus' parables I struggle to understand, yet as far as parables go, this one doesn't seem that difficult yet. It's fairly straightforward. Perhaps because Jesus follows it up with an explanation. Jesus compares the word of the kingdom with a sower spreading seed. Some falls upon a path, but the birds swoop in and snatch it all up. Jesus says this describes those who hear the word, but do not understand it, permitting the evil one to enter and steal what was sown. Then he says some fall on rocky soil, and the plants spring up quickly, but soon wither and die under the blazing sun. There are those who hear the word and rejoice, but lack deep roots with purchase. Once persecution or hardship appears, they fall away. Then there are those sown among thorns, which grow and eventually choke the young plants. Jesus says, these are those who hear and love the word, but the cares and concerns of the world crowd it out, and it produces nothing. Up to this point, I feel I've got a relatively good grasp of what Jesus is trying to convey. There have been times when the soil of my own heart has been rocky or choked with thorns. I have often preferred comfort and acquiescence to the difficulties and discomfort of real discipleship. I have permitted the distractions and allure of the world to steal my attention from God, to lead me down paths of self-interest and indifference to the needs of others. I've been there. I can relate to what Jesus is saying. Maybe you can too. Yield, of course, is an agricultural term. I learned it many years ago when writing articles about harvest for my small-town newspaper. Yield describes agricultural productivity or output. Jesus wraps up his parable by saying, other seeds fell on good soil and brought forth grain, some 100-fold, some 60, some 30. Let anyone with ears listen. If we listen, we hear that he's talking about yield. He actually uses the term in his subsequent explanation of the parable. But as for what was sown on good soil, this is one who hears the word and understands it, who indeed bears fruit and yields, in one case 100-fold, in another 60, and in another 30. Right here, I get a little stuck. I understand the concept of yield in the context of grain and harvest. But what does bear fruit and yielding, in one case 100-fold, in another 60, and in another 30 mean when it comes to hearing the word and understanding it? What is the yield? The fruit. And how does yielding 100-fold, practically speaking, differ from 60? How does yielding 60-fold look different from 30? In short, how do I know if I'm yielding 100-fold or less? This is something we should know, right? After all, Jesus says, let anyone with ears listen. At first glance, it seems we can figure this out. I mean, I would guess that Mother Teresa, laboring in the slums of Calcutta, yielded 100-fold. Or perhaps St. Francis of Assisi, who went around hugging lepers and received the stigmata. It seems to me that if anyone yielded 100-fold, it would be these two. Couldn't we assume that the great saints of the church all yielded 100-fold? How about the martyrs? What about 60-fold? What does such a life look like? Is there someone we could look at and feel relatively assured that their life yielded 60-fold? Theologians, missionaries, 30-fold? Where's the bar? Should I be embarrassed if my yield is just, say, 5-fold? Actually, I don't really like this kind of classifying. It seems to lack grace. Still, it bothers me because I want my own yield to be 100-fold. Wouldn't we all want to bear fruit and yield 100-fold for God? 30 at least. It's a dilemma because he says we must hear and understand the word to even produce it. What do we do if we can't figure out what he means? This is something I puzzled about for several days, and then I thought maybe I'm missing the point. Today's gospel reading is actually taken from the beginning and end of a longer passage. And I think the answer to our question might lie in a line from the missing middle section. In this part, Jesus has just told a parable, and the disciples, as usual, are confused. They ask him, why do you speak to them, meaning the people, in parables? Jesus replies, rather cryptically, I think, for those who have, more will be given, and they will have an abundance. But from those who have nothing, even what they have will be taken away. For those who have, more will be given, and they will have an abundance. But from those who have nothing, what they have will be taken away. This sounds enormously unfair. It's completely contrary to everything we've been taught about God and justice. Why would God take from those who have nothing? Why give to those who already have more than enough? Well, maybe we're talking about something that never diminishes when shared. That the more you give away, the more you have. Jesus knows. He talks about it all the time. They will know you are my disciples by your love. Love one another as I have loved you. For if you love those who love you, what reward have you? Even tax collectors do the same. Love your enemies. What if we look at love as the seed that produces the yield? What if we say, what if we paraphrase, for those who have love, more will be given, and they will have an abundance. But from those who have no love, what they have will be stolen by birds, withered under the sun, or choked by thorns. What kind of love are we even talking about? Recently, I heard this phrase while watching a documentary about Emmett Till, a 14-year-old African-American boy murdered in 1955 Mississippi for allegedly offending a white woman in a grocery store. During an interview, Emmett's now deceased mother, May Till Mobley, mentions, she says, "Love is not a feel word, but a do word." I think too often we get confused about this. Love as a feel word is effortless. It's easy to feel love, especially for those who love us. Love as a do word is much more difficult, sometimes almost impossible. We try to love our enemies, but it's really hard. Real love, the kind Jesus expects of his disciples, is self-sacrificing and can only manifest within community because it is a purely relational activity. Real love requires we exert effort on behalf of another. That's why Paul says in 1 Corinthians, love is patient, love is kind, love is not envious or boastful or arrogant or rude. It does not insist on its own way. It is not irritable or resentful. It does not rejoice in wrongdoing, but rejoices in truth. It bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things. Do love means a willingness to sacrifice our comfort, our convenience, our reputation, and our security for another. True love demands truth above all else, requiring that we be honest with ourselves, that we look our anger and fear straight in the eye and do all we can with God's help to grow more fully into love, more fully into community. Love gives birth to community, grows in community, and sustains community. That's why community persists, despite our disillusionment with human nature, with its selfishness and frailty. Dietrich Bonhoeffer, in his book Life Together, says, "For God is not a God of emotionalism, but the God of truth. Only that community which enters into the experience of this great disillusionment, with all its unpleasant and evil appearances, begins to be what it should be in God's sight, begins to grasp in faith the promise that is given to it." In another place he says, "The more genuine and the deeper our community becomes, the more everything else between us will recede, and the more clearly and purely will Jesus Christ and his work become the one and only thing that is alive between us. We have one another only through Christ, but through Christ we really do have one another." Christian discipleship is a path traveled in community. Community is our yield, and we grow it with the seed of love. The more love we sow, the higher the yield. Real love is exacting. It takes from us, but never leaves us empty. Do love is a lifelong struggle, a perpetual effort to tame our own egos so we can create space in our rocky and thorn-choked hearts to put the needs of others before our own, to protect the weak, to support the oppressed, to heal the hurting, to comfort the afflicted, to defend the dignity and worth of every human person, to love our enemies, to look out for each other, to love each other. Love is work. Hard, purposeful, often wearying, and sometimes dangerous work, much like farming. but like honest labor, it fulfills and produces. Whether we yield 100, 60, or 30-fold really depends on how much we are willing to grow in love, so we can extend the boundaries of community into ever-widening circles, so that it eventually encompasses all the children of God. Real love, selfless, unconditional, empathetic, humble. This is how the word of the kingdom uses us to produce 100, 60, and 30-fold. This is how love grows the kingdom. Because to those who have, more will be given, and they will have an abundance. Amen.